think the play-in tournament really had an impact, was causing teams who frankly might otherwise have thrown in the towel some number of weeks back to fight for those last playoff spots. And I think that goes to those 24 teams that were still competing only 2 weeks ago. And I think that's where we've had the biggest impact. And when we look back and do the postmortem on how successful it was, we won't just be looking at the individual ratings for these games, and they've been very good, but the greater impact on our ratings, for example, throughout the month of April. And that's really where it's had its biggest impact.
Adam J. Williams here. How you doing, man?
Hey, Jay, good.
Good. From a fan perspective and from a guy covering the league for a while, I loved it because there's typically sometimes I lose interest towards the latter part of the year as I just want to get excited for the playoffs. As you properly elaborated, there was so much intrigue around it. Is there a long-term commitment to the play-in tournament? Is that part of your schedule moving forward with the league?
I haven't made any secret about the fact I want it to be. I have two constituencies out there I need to convince of that. One is the 30 teams. And I think for the most part, they've supported it. Again, I understand the sentiment. If I were a team with the 7 seed, in particular, the notion after a long season, you could potentially get, play out of the playoffs. I understand those feelings. And I think at the same time, the teams recognize that, as you said, Jay, the amount of additional interest we created over the last month of the season, plus those playing games, make it worth it. And of course, the other constituency is the players. And for example, one player said to me yesterday, who's on the executive committee of the union, that he really likes the play-in tournament, but he felt it could potentially be a bit unfair. For example, if you were the 7th seed and you were a significant number of games ahead of the 8th seed, the notion that you can somehow lose 2 games and be out of the playoffs seems unfair. On the other hand, of course, same thing could happen to you in a playoff series. 2 quick losses obviously could, no matter where your seeding was going into the playoffs, that's the nature of the playoffs. College obviously plays, a win or go home, format. So I'm not saying we won't tinker with it, but I hope it's here to stay. And I'd say the broader context when you look at fan behavior, media trends these days, is you have to earn your viewers every day. And it's so you can't really make comparisons to the past. And I'm often pointing that out to the teams and the players. We have to look at the media landscape we find ourselves in today. And that means that there's enormous competition from whether it's other programs on television, whether it's enormous amount of programming on the internet, all kinds of other things that people can do with their time, virtually unlimited numbers of alternatives to watching NBA games. And I think we have the best product in the world. I mean, just that Laker Warriors game the other night, I wish it weren't on so late in the East, for all of us who stayed up late, but it was worth it. And it was spectacular. And I think when people see that programming, even just casual fans, they realize that how frankly incredible these athletes are and this competition is. But sort of it's on the league working with the players to ensure that we have a format that keeps everyone interested, especially over a long season. But, last thing I'll add, what's interesting is, as you guys know, and you had talked about it in the past, there over the past few years, pre-pandemic, there's been a lot of reference to our long regular season and, of course, the issues around player resting, and we've tried to address that as well. We moved to a 72-game season this year because of the pandemic and somewhat condensed. So we had 10 fewer regular season games. I hardly heard a mention about it. It was sort of, we just went to 72 games. And, and I think that the way we dealt best with the resting, although we have some rules around it now, was the motivation for teams to care about being in the playoffs and their actual playing position. That incentive is what made the biggest difference, I think, not the reduction of the 10 games.
Adam, considering all the competition around for visibility for the league and considering the fact that the NBA Finals will end mid-July, will there be a regular start season to next season in October? Because personally, I love the start on Christmas Day. I mean, it brings such a different kind of aura to the game, and obviously not competing with football. What do you think you're leaning towards looking more for next season?
We're looking towards getting back on our regular schedule. The problem is, of course, it won't be as short an off season as there was coming into this season, where we finished in mid-October and then started again in Christmas. Typically, as you guys know, we'd be done by the end of June, and our finals this year will be done. I think if we had 7 games, it would be July 22nd. But we're going to have to do a shorter off season, a bit of a shorter off season, if we're going to get back on schedule. Because if we start late and then go late again, obviously into next summer, this will just continue. And we think, in terms of fan interest, what our television partners are telling us is that we're better off completing our finals by the end of June. In order to complete our finals by the end of June, at least to stay with the format we currently have, we need to start in mid-October. To your point, Jay, about starting at Christmas, and that goes to my point about the 72 games versus 82 games. We've looked at other lengths of the regular season. We will continue to do so. At least based on the evidence from this season, I don't think that's a strong argument to go to fewer regular season games. And look, it's not a secret. It obviously, as a business, that's a reduction in revenue. I think the benefit of reducing the number of games, one, it would be go to player health, and we'll see whether, a lot of science around that in terms of amount of rest and number of minutes and how impactful that is. And then the other issue is, if you have fewer games, does it make each game that much more valuable? On the other end of the spectrum, of course, is, the NFL, where, each game has so much value that if you're a fan, you're not going to take a game off as a viewer or as attending a game. So those are all things we're continuing to look at. But at least now our plan is to start again, roughly, give or take a week, mid to late October of this year.